Hello and welcome to another episode of Back to Beverly, a podcast series bringing the best, brightest, and most successful Beverly Hills High School alumni back to campus to engage in a thoughtful discussion reflecting on their days as a Norman. They'll share what they learned that helped prepare them for future success in their careers and offer guidance and tips for listeners. I'm your host, Dillon Curtis, Beverly High class of 2010, and I'm glad to have you along for this journey. Before we get to the interview, I'd like to provide a bit of background on this podcast and how it came to be. When I was at Beverly, already over 10 years ago, I was active on KBEV, Beverly High's very own TV station, the Norman News, which is the longest running student-produced news show in the country, and even hosted my own, albeit short, TV series, Back to Beverly. I interviewed the sitting mayor of Beverly Hills, the publisher of the Beverly Hills Weekly, the head of Rogers & Cowan PR, and a sitting California Superior Court judge, all of whom once walked the halls of this great high school. While I wish I had conducted more interviews at the time, as with most teenagers, I was focused on other things, and 4 years at Beverly quickly came and went. However, since graduation, I've had a desire to bring back the program in one shape or form, and thus the birth of this podcast in 2022. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a review, subscribe, and send it to a friend. You can also find me on social, at Back to Beverly on Instagram and Facebook. Now here's the interview. I'm thrilled to be sitting down today with a successful entrepreneur and business owner who, over the last few years, has disrupted the nightlife industry and created a safe and respected place for females in the operations of bars, nightclubs, and their specialty, private events. Her company counts some of today's biggest names in pop culture as clients, including Kim Kardashian and Tyga, as well as Fortune 500 brands, Amazon, and Google. She was recently named to the 2022 Forbes 30 Under 30 list and featured in issues of Us Weekly and Flaunt magazine, sharing more on the rise and success of her boutique hospitality agency. If you've been lucky enough to end up on one of her guest lists, you've likely interacted with her or one of her amazing team members. Please join me in welcoming to the show co-founder of Viper and Beverly High grad class of 2013, Celeste Durve. All right, I think we're good to go. Thumbs up from the control center. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
How does it feel to be back? I know we were talking just before, but is this the first time since graduation?
So this is the first time since graduation, with the exception of a few years ago. I did come back for career day.
Okay.
One time. But I don't think when I came, I didn't really walk through the halls or anything. I kind of just came and I was in the science building, and then I think I left after that. So today was I was walking through the halls and I was just, it's so nostalgic. That's the only way to put it. So it was a little strange.
How was it? So you mentioned career day. How was it being on the other side of it, having sat through one of those and then being a presenter?
It was interesting. I feel like it was a little premature for me at the time, just knowing where I am now. I feel like it would be better off if I did it now, but at the time it was really cool, and I did it with friends of mine who also went to Beverly and started businesses, so it was the three of us together and on a panel, so nice. it was a good experience.
So I had been looking forward to this one. I knew we were going to sit down, and I don't know if you remember, but I think we overlapped a year at Beverly. My senior year, I think I recorded an interview with you in the studio, so it's kind of a cool feeling to be back all these years later. In any case, looking back on your time here and knowing how much success you've experienced since, did Beverly prepare you adequately for what you've sort of faced in the real world?
Yeah. I feel like my experience at Beverly was really different than majority of the kids who went to school here, just because the neighborhood is pretty affluent, but I didn't have those circumstances growing up. And for a large portion of time, I didn't even live in Beverly Hills. And so, it took a lot for me to compete in that space. So I think that growth that I had to endure in order to essentially be able to hang, really did prepare me, because it gave me that work ethic. And, just for example, Beverly's kind of expensive, at least in my opinion it was, for activities. So prom or junior senior night or things like that you have to pay for, or ASB trips. And so I always had a job outside of school in order to be able to do that, because I never wanted to be the only girl out of my friend group who couldn't do those things. Sure. And so I think by way of that, it gave me a lot of work experience and ambition. And then ASB was super helpful too. And then, I took a lot of APs that were really helpful. just with English and stuff, because you learn like for the world of business, just like good grammar and things like that. So in that way, yes, I would say so.
So you mentioned ASB, and I think you were class president your senior year, is that right? So I'd come across an article that they had written about you just after that election, and I think the headline was "The Chicken Charge." Knowing where you are now, running your own business and a successful business at that, I mean, it almost felt like at that age that this would be, your sort of path. What would you say to that?
That's actually so funny. I remember that article. Yeah, I think I did. And even like when I was in high school here, I started something called Hunger for Change, which was like my little nonprofit. I don't think I ever really knew what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to like be in that leadership space. I also think in high school I was just really bossy. I've relaxed a lot since then. But yeah, senior year I was head row president, and I was the only female on head row, and I think that's what led them to that name for that article. But yeah, I feel like I always knew. I always had a feeling, and I always had like a calling in that direction.
It was sort of the destiny, even at a young age. So obviously you graduated from Beverly 2013, and you've been pretty open and honest on your own podcast, which titled Smart is Sexy. And if you haven't listened to it, I highly recommend it. Celeste hosts with her business partner and co-founder and best friend, I think safe to say, Kelsey Kitchener. But you've been open on the podcast about your decision not to go to college following high school. How did you come to that? And was that sort of a tough decision? And was it a little scary at the time, being 17, 18, and sort of being thrown into the real world?
Yeah, it was a really tough decision because I knew that I didn't have the money to pay for that and like to go into the world with like so much debt coming, just off the jump, being 18 or 19. But it was really hard because at this school in specific, there's a lot of pressure on colleges, and not even necessarily from staff, at least my year. It was really from like my classmates, especially I think being in ASB and just your junior, senior year, or being in APs, like it's all everyone can talk about. And, I feel like if you grow up in a wealthier neighborhood, there's just a lot of like inherent competition. So it was a really hard decision to make, and I questioned myself repeatedly, but something in me was like, I just don't know that it's for me. And I really was so ambitious to get work experience. So once I graduated, I immediately got an internship, immediately got jobs. Because my mom was not super thrilled with the decision, but I just had to weigh the pros and cons. And I've always been a pretty independent thinker, and I read a lot, and I saw, obviously my classmates going, but I also knew that they could afford it, and I had to keep that in mind. And I didn't talk about it in high school, the difference in social class, but it was something that I always knew internally, and so it was like something that I had to take home every night. So I kept it to myself a lot, but I just knew like this is probably not super realistic for me. And I still took APs and I still tried my best. But then another thing was I couldn't afford an SAT tutor, and I couldn't afford things that other kids had. I mean, there were kids in my grade who could afford, the actual textbooks from the actual like AP whatever website it was. And I'm like, I just didn't have that, and I was really self-aware about that, and so it was just a more realistic option for me.
It's a pretty mature thought process to have as a teenager, to be thinking, then have that foresight to say, hey, look, I'm not going to burden myself with all this that I'm not certainly necessarily prepared for. So you mentioned internships right after you graduate high school, and I think in one of them you eventually, is that where you met Kelsey? I think you guys were working for Brent Bolthouse, is that right?
Yeah, so I started working for Bolthouse as an intern right out of high school. And then Kels was actually going to FITM, and so she took up an internship as well, and that's how we met. And then that's, eventually from there is how we started Viper.
Talk to me a little bit about that time in your life, juggling multiple jobs, I think, having the internship, and then also, once you meet Kels, you guys sort of connect and put your heads together and come up with the idea for Vipers. How was that?
That was an interesting experience. So one thing that I don't know that everyone knows about me and Kels is that we actually were not friends when we first met. We didn't really care for one another, but we both really respected each other's work ethic. So being an intern, you're obviously around a bunch of interns, and Kels and I were the only people who were holding down multiple jobs. And she, we had the same hustle. We would go work a job, change in the bathroom, go to the next job, go to the internship. And so during that time period, I think I was like from 17 to 19, because I was 16 as a senior. So I was like super young too in that space. And then Kels was the same. She was probably 20, 21. We both just had a very similar work ethic. And so what was happening was we were interning for Bolt House, and they were doing events at the time. And as interns, they ask you to do whatever. Go get lunch, go do this, jump up and down, who knows. And something that they would ask us a lot is to manage check-in for events. And so we had told them, or during this time frame of not making any money and always working so many hours, I had asked Kels, what if we tell them, can we just bring girls we know and we'll manage check-in? And I was honestly hoping to make maybe $50, maybe $100, because this was just like a hustle period, trying to learn as much as we could. And so they didn't think that this was a good idea, but Kels and I did. And so the way it started was we were just running doors. Like any door we could get our hands on, it could have been the smallest like house party to some big event, we would just take, and for whatever price at the time. And so then over time we started, like, we got a lawyer, we incorporated, we put money towards an iPad to actually check people in. We started like figuring that out, and then 6 years now, I mean, we've really expanded what we do, but that's how we started.
It's interesting how it was born out of such an obvious idea of just like, managing this check-in process. And I think I've listened to quite a bit of your own podcast, and I think you guys mentioned like this is the first impression that people are getting when they come to your event. So why not have it be the best? It shouldn't be a sloppy process. It should be well put together. When you guys had that initial idea, when you started sharing it with the folks, where maybe at Bolt House or elsewhere, what was the feedback? Were there detractors? And on the flip side, was there anybody that really supported you guys?
When we started, we reached out to like a few people we knew in the industry. I reached out to people that I went to high school with that had been super young in business. And then, of course, our old bosses and stuff. And I would say pretty much everyone advised against it. And everyone was like, there's no money in this. There's no expansion. There's no scalability. There's no need, because no one else had ever done this. And so it was always like, oh, we have a bouncer, or we'll just put an intern or something like that. So pretty much everyone said not to do it. And some people were really abrasive. One person was like, this will fail within 6 months. I was like, cool.
It's amazing to me that people, like obviously you guys had the vision, and there was a lot of people that didn't share that vision. And I'd be curious to hear their thoughts now, seeing where you guys are going.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, and I could understand it. I think also for them, they were maybe thinking like, oh, this is just the door, which maybe, maybe had we just stayed doing only the door, maybe that could have been true. I don't know, because we've expanded a lot and scaled a lot. And so, but yeah, pretty much everyone at the time was like, this is a horrible idea.
It's interesting and unfortunate for them. I'm curious, and I'm a big believer in this, but I feel like in life, everything sort of happens for a reason, and the universe has a funny way of working out. So, you graduate Beverly, you decide not to go to college, you start working this job, you meet Kelsey, and you guys go on this path to create your own business. Have you thought about everything in life happening for a reason in context of your own life?
Definitely, 100%. I remember that I always thought like the entertainment space of LA was so fascinating, because for me, just watching like LA nightlife and that industry is kind of where everything crosses over, right? Like, where else is like an athlete gonna meet an influencer, gonna meet a doctor, gonna meet a CEO, gonna meet, like, it was just always that space that was such an interesting intersection to me. And I really wanted to be in that world, just like a little undetermined on what we were gonna do. So I do think that everything was so serendipitous, and everything really does happen for a reason. I believe that wholeheartedly, including my decision not to go to college, which, was a tough one at the time.
Well, I mean, it's amazing what you guys have built. So obviously I've mentioned Viper, and we've sort of danced around what you guys do, but how would you best describe what the company is, what you guys do when you sort of pitch yourself to a new client?
We are a bespoke hospitality agency, and we reimagine guest experience on behalf of brands and artists. So what that means is anything that is guest facing, we come in. That could be compiling a guest list, the girls at the front door, the girls seating your table, your cocktail servers, the girls demoing a product as brand ambassadors. That could be promo models. And then recently we just launched casting, which is really exciting because it allows clients and artists and brands to take our team and utilize them digitally. So that could be casting, a music video or a video, but it could also mean casting an audience somewhere, or using them to demo a product, filming them for a commercial. There's such a wide variety of options for clients now, which is really cool because we have such a strong team, and I just wanted to be able to use them, in other ways as well.
You mentioned casting, and the evolution of, like what you said, trying to get any door into now all these avenues that you guys are doing. How important is that to you and Kelsey in terms of continuing to evolve? I feel like that is maybe top of mind almost every day for you guys.
Every day.
Yeah.
I always say, I'm always present because I have to be mindful, but I'm 3 years, 5 years, 10 years out all the time. And casting was actually interesting because the way it happened was we randomly got a call from Kim Kardashian's team that were like, can we use your girls in this video that Kim's gonna film? And we were like, that's actually a brilliant idea. Thank you, Kris Jenner. Yeah. So that's actually how it started, and it ended up just being such a perfect fit with what we already do, especially because there's tons of girls in LA that, work in that space, but the agency model is really outdated, and we're not an agency, so we work a little differently. So it's really nice for them, and then it's really nice for us and our clients as well. So that was a natural evolution, but I'm always, down the road. Even what I'm working on today probably won't launch for a year or, maybe a year and a half, maybe 2 years, but we're already planning that. In my head, I'm already okay, I'm going to IPO in 5 years. So I need this to get to this. Yeah. So I think it's just the natural, anybody who's a founder, I think has to be like that.
Do you give, in a normal day, do you give yourself time to sort of dream and think of what's next while also managing what needs to happen this weekend or the next event? I mean, how do you juggle that?
It's so natural for me that I actually need to work in the reverse. I actually have to turn it off because it's something that I spend so much time thinking about all the time, going to bed, waking up, truthfully, any waking moment. Now I go to therapy to do the reverse, to kind of bring myself and be present, because I didn't want to miss my own life, and I didn't want to be somebody who didn't take inventory of their own life. And so I have to also stay present because naturally I'm very in the future and focusing on what's next. And then luckily I have a really amazing team of girls that manages majority of our day to day. So that's really helpful. And now we just have so many people that take over those different, whether they work for us full-time or they're just agencies that we utilize. That's really helpful because I know that the day-to-day is covered, events are covered, and then I can be, focusing on something else.
I think our older generation would say wise beyond your years, but I think just wise, yeah. So we're taping this March 2022. We're obviously emerging from what has been 2 years of a pandemic. Mm-hmm. It's probably a silly question, but I'll let you answer it. Did you guys feel a significant impact from the pandemic?
Mm-hmm. The pandemic was probably the hardest thing I've ever been through. Kels would say the same. We lived together at the time, and our entire industry was shut down. And obviously, I think everyone's industry was shut down, but there was a lot of people who could find solutions, right? You're a restaurant, you could maybe do to go, or you could put up plexiglass, or I don't know. A lot of businesses also boomed during the pandemic, right. But for us, it was extremely challenging, difficult. There were points where I was like, I think we might be homeless. I think I might be living under the underpass next week. So it was really, really difficult. However, I will say it forced us to evolve the business. Sure. And so now that's why we're going a little bit heavier in the digital space, the brand space, and kind of moving towards that. We've moved into sponsorships a little bit more now because we had to evolve. And I appreciate that lesson. Granted, receiving that lesson was very, very difficult. Sure.
Well, it took a pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. It took what's a once in 100 years event. What did you guys do to sort of stay top of mind? Because it felt like, at least, and I know you guys pretty well. Right before the pandemic, you guys were finally hitting your stride. Mm-hmm. Business was picking up for you guys. You were meeting a lot of clients. They were booking you. And then the world shut down. So for the last, I would give it 18 months, how did you manage to stay top of mind for these folks to say, hey, when this starts up again, we're still here?
It was really tough. And, throughout the pandemic, we tried in the beginning, still reaching out to people, doing Zoom calls. I don't know if you remember in the beginning of the pandemic, everyone was like, let's Zoom. Right. But then as the pandemic continued and kind of didn't let up in that middle space, I was like, I'm done doing Zoom calls. I'm done, I'm like, I don't know what else to do because I'm like, let's just give this some time. And it was really that break, I think, that pushed us forward. Kels and I, like I said, we lived together. So we would go on 2-hour walks every day. We forced each other to just meditate, journal, read a lot. I think both of us during that first 9 months of the pandemic, I think we each read like 20 books. We just did whatever we could, but it was really challenging.
Sure.
Like, very, very stressful. We did not know how to pay rent. I think we were just behind on rent. I just think we stopped paying. Collections was calling us all the time. It was really challenging. Now I'm super grateful because coming out of the pandemic, we, of course, by the grace of God, expanded times 10. But that time frame was really hard.
So that was going to be my next question was, have you seen the business return to levels pre-pandemic? I mean, is it what you guys were seeing in 2019? It's
beyond. It's like, what we made in sales in 2019, we made it in the whole year. We made it in 1 month, out of the pandemic. It was crazy, and we closed SoFi Stadium, which was a huge deal for us. Yeah. And then, of course, with Super Bowl and just diversifying, so now adding in options for brands and sponsorships and things like that. So, and now I have a team of 4 full-time in addition to me and Kels, and we hired a creative agency, and we redid the branding and like the identity, and we brought on legal counsel, and we brought on partners and all of that. So it's a completely different business, and I would say that Kels and I are completely different founders. But that came, I think it also had to do with the fact that after the pandemic, a lot of our clients did want to spend money just because we had a year of, no events or a year and a half. And then it also came with how much preparation Kels and I did to be able to handle all of that.
So as you guys are expanding, there's obviously a lot of decisions that need to be made. How do you guys know what you guys are doing right? I mean, do you guys bounce ideas off each other? Do you come to a consensus between the two of you? How does that get worked out?
Kels and I are really good at knowing our roles. So anything, we just know who's going to make what decision. If it's client facing or like any sort of like development, she'll probably just refer to me. And then if it's anything team related, branding related, visual, creative, anything like that, I just defer to her. And then we do have a board of advisors that we rely on pretty heavily, for whatever their respective spaces or what expertise is. So we utilize them, and then I really trust our team a lot too. Like our full-time team is so good, and they all act like owners of the company, which I really appreciate because they're on the ground doing events, and so we utilize them as well. But we just know our roles, I would say.
Sounds like you guys work nicely in harmony. So obviously we touched a bit about what you guys faced during the pandemic. Are there other challenges that you guys have faced growing the business, particularly being female-owned in a male-driven industry?
Yes. I think for us at least, there's this like common misconception, or I won't say it's a misconception actually, because it's very real, that being a woman in business, you deal with a lot of tough things from men. And I will say I have experienced that, but there's also been a lot of men who have been really helpful in scaling the business and really impactful. And there's been women who are impactful too, but there is also this like competition amongst women that isn't always talked about that we've run into a lot, especially because Kels and I were younger coming into this space. So we ran into that from both genders, to be honest, a little condescending, a little degrading from both. Yeah. And then I've of course I'm pretty used to demanding clients. I don't have an issue with that, but I've had a few outliers that were extremely abrasive, I would say. So, we've run into that. And then just as founders, we had to navigate our own dynamic. Keep in mind, we built this company being in our 20s, living in LA. Yeah. So it was like, not only did we have to manage a team and grow a business, we also we're mid 20-year-old girls living in Los Angeles. It's not an easy place to navigate. So between the personal, the co-founder relationship, the client dynamic, and then capital. Capital was really hard because we invested everything back into the business. We did it self-funded, but neither of us come from any money. So it's not like we had this pile of cash laying around. Sure. So that was really challenging. And we're so open about it. So we talk about it all the time of, when we couldn't afford shampoo and conditioner or dog food or didn't know what to do or how to make rent and all of that. So all of that put together was just challenging.
It's interesting you mentioned all that. I feel like some of the most successful people have been there where they're making sacrifices in their personal life because they believe in the idea that they're working towards. The challenges that you faced, how did those, or do you feel like they've sort of helped shape you to be a better leader, given, you're still in your mid-20s here and you're managing a team of, I think the last time I heard was over 100 girls, I think you guys have on the payroll. So, I'm curious how and do you think your leadership skills have evolved since, you guys started the company till today?
I definitely think they've evolved, and I think that over time, because of everything that we went through, it made Kels and I a lot more confident in our capabilities. And an interesting outcome of being more confident in our capabilities is that we are way more relaxed. So I feel like I see a lot of companies have like intense power struggles or a lot of like ego in their dynamic. And Kels and I just don't work like that, especially not with our team. We're like the opposite of micromanagers. I'm like, you should manage everything, you know? And that comes from the fact that Kels and I just went through so much. And I feel like when you go through all of that and learn really who you are and what you're made of, there's no need to force it anymore. And interestingly enough, you know, being able to pull back and stop forcing things and stop, you know, forcing opinions or trying to be a boss, I guess, has really helped us a lot, because now we're so much more in alignment with what we do and more in alignment with our team. There's not like a ton of friction or resistance. So I would say like that was the biggest asset of everything we went through in terms of leadership. And then you get really creative when you don't have any money, you know, so you really like learn things. I couldn't pay, you know, now I just pay people to do things, but at the time I had to teach myself. So yeah, I mean, I had a lot less time on my hands, but I learned a lot during that experience. And now I think about that sometimes when I just delegate things. I'm like, damn, am I skipping the process of learning, you know, now? But you kind of have to pick and choose.
Well, I think it's an important value to have as a leader, to be able to say, hey, I'm giving this to you, but it's not something that I wouldn't have done myself or that I haven't done previously.
Yeah.
And that was shared with me in my career recently when I had a mentor situation. And I said, you know, is there one piece of advice you sort of live by? And this gentleman said, you know, I would never ask someone to do something that I wouldn't do myself. And I think people that work for you respect you, and especially if they know that, hey, I'm not asking you to do something I wouldn't do.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. I agree, because I mean, even we just did this big party for Drake for the Super Bowl. It was the H Wood Revolve party, and everyone, as you can imagine, is like glammed up in heels, looks amazing, like all the guests, but even my whole team, I had 40 girls on it. And then you have me running through this event carrying a case of water to make sure that all my girls have water for that night, and you know, putting on sneakers. And I texted Kelsey, I'm like, I look crazy, because everyone's like all dolled up getting ready to see Drake, and then I'm just like running through this event. And you know, I don't go to events anymore, but I did go to this one because it was a bigger weekend for us, and but I would still do it in a heartbeat. Or you'll find Kelsey charging iPads, or, you know, cleaning up the trash from the wristbands on the floor while the girls manage the door. So we're still like that to this day.
Yeah. My old boss used to say, nobody sees how the sausage is made, but I mean, that's exactly how it is, right? I mean, the event's got to run, and that's the stuff you don't see, but that's how it gets
Exactly.
It gets done. So, you know, obviously you've had a pretty successful career so far, you know, in your early 20s. What are some advice you could share with other young females that either want to enter the nightlife industry or sort of just want to create their own business on their own?
I think if you want to enter nightlife as a female, you really have to stay true to yourself, which is so much easier said than done in a space like nightlife, because one, LA nightlife is extremely intimidating, and it's very cutthroat. People are not, there's no sugarcoating. It's not like this very friendly space. It's actually, you know, the complete opposite. It's very like money driven, celebrity driven, and very competitive. And you know, Kels and I did our own thing, and we got a lot of unsolicited advice based on that, telling us we shouldn't have. So you have to like really find your space and stay true to yourself. If you want to start a business in general, I would say, you know, be honest with yourself about your goals and how badly you want them. Because for me, I knew that I wanted to build this empire, and I knew that I was going to have to sacrifice. I don't know that I knew how much I was going to have to sacrifice. Granted, I wouldn't do anything different. But I think that a lot of people maybe think they want to start a business or be a founder or something like that, and are not super clear on what that means, especially if you have a team. You know, like I have a team under me, so that was another added stress, especially during the pandemic. I was so worried about them and their well-being, and what we could do to support them. So I think you just have to be really honest with yourself. Are you willing to put in the work? Are you willing to sacrifice? Are you willing to let go of, you know, other things in your life that might not be priority? And then the second thing I would say is be really careful with whose advice you accept, because I receive the most amount of unsolicited advice every day pretty much, and it's fine, you know, like it doesn't bother me at all anymore. But at the time when I was really young and I was trying to learn, had I listened to a lot of people, I mean, they would have derailed my career, you know. And
Was there something that went off in your mind that said, hey, I know this is going to be successful, I'm just going to block you out? Or what was it that got you to that point?
Honestly, there was like one time I went to this, he owns the Hundreds, Bobby Hundreds. He did this speaking thing at Apple where he just sat on a panel and he said something I swear like changed my life. He was like, you know, when a singer is on stage, they have like a mic in their ear, and he was like, sometimes they take it out. And he said that's because it's drowning out the sound of their own voice. And he was like, so be careful with feedback and make sure that, you know, you can still hear your own voice. And that really changed my perspective, because when I was younger and I was hustling, I was really open. I wanted to learn everything.
Right.
Like I would read anything, whatever I could do, watch anything. So I was really open to hearing what everyone had to say. But like looking back, had I followed the advice I was given, I mean, I wouldn't be anywhere nearby, anywhere near where we are. So I think that's really important. Like, know what advice to follow, and you got to trust yourself, trust your instincts.
It's an impressive quality to have, to be able to say, hey, look, I know what I'm chasing, and I'm not gonna listen to the detractors, because, you know, you're just trying to put me down, and there's no reason for it. It's sort of the price of being successful, I think, right? As people see the rise and they just want to throw negativity your way. Yeah,
it's tough, you know, because sometimes I'm like, wait, is this actually a terrible idea, or are they mistaken? Right. Sometimes it's hard to figure out, but you have to just like also trust your gut. That's a big one.
Well, and it's good that you guys are fearless and are willing to just sort of go with it anyways, right? Like,
I think that's the benefit of doing, I mean, I was 19 when we launched Viper, and I think that's the benefit of being so young, is I was so naive. But because of that, I was like, this is going to be great. Right. You know, now if you had asked me at 26 to start what I started then, I would be like, this is a horrible idea. Right. Because now I overthink everything, or I think about like, oh, the market looks like this, or what about this, or what about this? You know, like as an adult, you have so many other things that you worry about. Yeah. But I was 19, so I was like, let's do it.
Well, like we said, everything happens for a reason. So before I let you go, a couple more questions for you. Curious, what is sort of the favorite part of your job?
Ooh, favorite part. I'm really obsessed with my team, and I think it's just so cool to be able to like work with people that I love and respect and adore. And I get just like the biggest adrenaline rush off of like team brainstorms and team meetings. And just that evolution and what we can do and ways we can create. That's definitely my favorite part.
And we touched on it a little bit earlier, but where do you see sort of Viper over the next 5-10 years, and how do you continue to evolve the business and expand into new avenues outside of, you know, what you guys are doing on the day-to-day now?
Definitely expanding the casting side of things, I think, is going to be really cool, because we're seeing such a decline in that old agency model, just with the way social media is flowing and the fact that, you know, brands can go directly to talent these days. So I'm really excited about casting. And then additionally, just honestly working in that space with brands and with advertisers, and what we can do in terms of sponsorships and just different ways to utilize our team and to be able to still be in that space, you know, because right now we do guest experience for brands and artists at live experience. Sure. But to be able to do that digitally, or to be able to do that through content, through events still, of course, is really exciting for us. And then being able to like analyze that data that we get back and just push that industry forward and see like what people are really into. We're really like that liaison between a brand and its guests. So I just love finding new ways to do that, whether that's data, whether that's on site, experiential, brand ambassadors. That's like really, I think, where we're headed.
And speaking of brands, you guys, I think, recently launched your own sort of event that you guys are owning, the Supper Club. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So we did launch a thing called Viper Supper Club. It was actually our publicist's idea, who was like, I think that this would be very cool for you guys to host a dinner where, you know, once a month. It didn't happen once a month, but we were supposed to do it once a month. We've only done 2, and then we kind of took a pause. So everyone is themed. So the one we did last time was a media dinner, so it was different editors from publications. But the next one might be nightlife power players, and then the one following that might be people in music. So it's just a way of bringing people in our network together, because we only do the front door, right? Like, we're not a production company, we're not a hospitality, like a nightclub company. We have such a wide variety of clients that we were like, we really have to expand on this and connect people to each other, because that's just one of our favorite things to do. So that's really what that Supper Club does.
It's awesome. I mean, when you think about like the most fun things what you've done is like someone brought you together with someone else, and I think that's what you guys are trying to get at there. Yes,
that's really what we want to do, and like be able to connect people so that they can work together, and just do, you know, different types of experiences that are a little different than what we're used to seeing.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming in today. This was so much fun. I really enjoyed listening to the story, and I can't wait to continue to watch you and Kelsey grow the business over the next few years.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. This was so exciting.
Of course. Till next time, guys. Thanks again.
Thanks again for listening. And just a reminder, if you enjoyed this interview, hit that subscribe button, leave me a review, and tell a friend. You can also find me on social at Back to Beverly on Instagram. Till next time, I'm your host, Dillon Curtis, signing off.
Did you press record?